Professor Thomas Johnson. He's in Monterey, California, and he's the Director of Program for Culture and Conflict Studies at the Naval Postgraduate School. He's also the author of the book Taliban Narratives. Profs, really appreciate your time. We heard that from our reporter talking about possible terror attacks in Afghanistan. US President Biden says the Taliban, though, isn't America's greatest terror threat. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's the big question. I mean, of course, in the peace agreement that Khalilzad, under the Trump administration, negotiated with the Taliban, one of the key points of the agreement was that Taliban would not allow terrorist groups to use Afghanistan for either planning terrorist attacks or mounting terrorist attacks. But at the same time, the Taliban haven't been very sincere in most of their negotiations. And it's hard for me to believe certain things that the Taliban actually suggest. I am pleased that they're living up to their word that they've refused to attack American soldiers that are still in the country.
Professor, you speak about the sincerity of the Taliban. While their leadership has made many promises since they took Kabul on Sunday, and they've spoken about how they will treat minorities, women, former Afghan officials, saying that everybody will be treated equally. It's what their political leadership is saying, but what we're seeing on the ground and getting reports about seems to be very different. Do you think there is this disconnect between the messaging from Taliban leaders and the actual fighters?
Yeah, I think the probability of that is extremely high. I think that the Taliban are going to be a little less draconian than they were when they ruled the country from 1996 to 2001, because they desperately need international recognition and international aid. They don't financially, they don't have the money to run the country. But their positions relative to women, I think, will be this. I think that it's going to be very different in the urban versus the rural areas of Afghanistan. Many of the aspects of radical Deobandi Sharia law that they instituted aren't that different than the Sharia law that's practiced in the large rural groups of the area. But they're very different than what's been practiced in the urban areas, especially Kabul. So I think that they might allow girls and young women to attend school, but there'll be Islamic schools, there'll be madrasas, and they could even have much of their education based on repeating the Quran and memorizing the Quran. I doubt if they'll allow women, and of course the women will never be able to go to schools with males. That's a thing that they've said all along. But I think as far as Western education is concerned, I don't believe that's going to happen.
Professor, I want to touch on a point that you've been tweeting about, and there's this new book coming out called Afghanistan Papers. It talks about US presidents deceiving the American public about the war in that country. What can we expect from that book?
Well, let me first tell you one thing before I address that question. The United States were basically defeated in Afghanistan because we never understood the country and its people. We spent very, very little time in the rural areas, which was really the military center of gravity. And, whenever a new commander came in country, he said that victory was just around the corner. We would hear that on a yearly basis. So the number one problem is we just never understood the country. And the book that's coming out August 31st is written by Craig Whitlock, and it's going to be called The Pentagon Papers. And he has a multiple variety of sources that explicitly show how dishonest both the United States government as well as the United States military with the American public. And this dishonesty actually drove our narrative in the country.
It's going to be very interesting to read that book and find out what Craig has to say. Professor Thomas Johnson speaking to us there from Monterey. Always appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.